Presente e futuro. Present and future. It can get confusing in Italian because in many instances you can use the present tense to talk about the future. And so my students often ask me, when should I be using one and when should I be using the other one? In questo episodio parliamo del presente indicativo e del futuro indicativo in italiano e di quando usare l'uno o l'altro. In this episode, we'll talk about the present indicative and the future indicative in Italian and when to use one or the other one. Ciao e benvenuti a questo nuovo episodio di Italian Grammar Made Easy. Mi chiamo Margherita e sono la creatrice di Italian Matters e host di questo podcast. Remember, I always have additional resources for you to make the learning of Italian grammar a bit easier. So make sure to download this episode's guide at italianmatters.com/6. I also have a quiz for you on today's topic at the same link. Ora vediamo quando si può usare il presente al posto del futuro. Now we'll see when you can use the present tense in place of the future tense. And just to be sure, these are instances when the future tense can be substituted by the present tense. However, if you do use the future, it's correct. It's just that in spoken Italian, we tend to use the present tense a lot in place of the future. And now we'll look at the three specific instances when this happens. First, when we talk about actions and events that will happen for sure. Avverranno certamente. They will happen for sure. For example, tra 5 mesi vado in Italia. In 5 months, I'll go to Italy. In English, it comes natural for me to use the future because in 5 months I'll go to Italy. But in Italian, we can use the present. Tra 5 mesi vado, present tense, in Italia. Here is another example. A settembre inizio l'università. In September, I'll start the university. Again, in English, it seems more natural to use the future tense, but in Italian, it's the opposite. It's more natural to use the present tense. A settembre inizio l'università. Inizio is the present tense. You could use the future here in Italian. A settembre inizierò, future, l'università. It's not wrong, but in spoken language, we tend to use the present tense for actions and events that will happen for sure. The second case where we tend to use the present tense in place of the future is with the periodo ipotetico della realtà. I know, a lot of Italian words. In other words, to express hypotheses for situations which are real or possible. Since these situations are real and they are possible, we can use the present indicative. For example, se piove ci bagniamo. If it rains, we'll get wet. Or se studi passi l'esame. If you study, you will pass the exam. Se studi passi l'esame. Here we have two present tenses, right? Studi, passi. If you use the future, it's fine. You can say se studierai, passerai l'esame. If you will study, you will pass the exam. That's not wrong, again, it's fine to use this. But in spoken Italian, we tend to use the present tense to express hypotheses for situations which are real or possible. The third instance where we tend to do this again is with dovere, to have to, followed by the infinitive when expressing a future action. Vediamo un esempio. Let's see an example. Devo dare l'esame di guida tra 10 giorni. I have to take the driving test in 10 days. Again, I said devo dare. Devo is in the present tense and it's followed by the infinitive dare. And so this is the third instance where we would use the present tense in place of the future in Italian. Now there are 4 specific instances where you just cannot use the present tense in place of a future tense. 1. When we make an hypothesis and we just are not completely sure. For example, tra 20 anni useremo solo le macchine elettriche. In 20 years, we will only use electric cars. Useremo. Useremo is a future tense. And this is an hypothesis, right? I cannot be 100% sure that in 20 years we will actually only use electric cars. So since we are not completely sure, it's an hypothesis, we use the future tense. Numero 2. The future tense must be used when we express disbelief, doubt, and uncertainty. In English, the equivalent would be probably, could be, may, or might be. For example, dov'è Maria? Sarà in giardino. Where is Maria? She's probably in the yard. Sarà in giardino. Sarà is the future. So here, I am not completely sure. I'm not completely sure where Maria is. She's probably in the yard. So since I'm expressing uncertainty, I'm using the future tense. Here is another example. Ecco un altro esempio. Che ore sono? Saranno le 11. What time is it? I'm not completely sure, so I'm gonna say it's probably 11. Saranno le 11. I'm guessing the time. Saranno le 11. I'm not completely sure, so I use the future tense. Numero 3. With actions that have a long duration in the future, especially with the adverbs sempre, meaning always in English, and mai, which means never in English. For example, ti amerò per sempre. I will love you forever. This is a future action that has a certain long duration. I will love you forever. We have per sempre, and so I use the future tense. Another example, non andrò mai in barca. I will never go on a boat. I'm saying in the future, I will never do this. I will never go on a boat. Right? Long duration. Never. Mai. So I use the future tense. The number 4 instance when you must use the future tense is with the expressions ti dirò, I'll tell you, sarà, it will be, and pensare che plus a verb in the future tense, to think that, plus a verb in the future. Here is an example. Pensi che riusciremo ad arrivare in orario? Do you think that we will be able to arrive on time? Pensi che riusciremo? Here we have a verb pensare, pensi, plus che, plus a verb in the future tense, riusciremo. Ecco un altro esempio. Ti dirò, non ho voglia di andare al cinema. I'll tell you, I don't feel like going to the movies. Ti dirò. Ti dirò is in the future tense. Bene, ottimo. Let's recap now. We have 3 specific cases when you can use the present tense in place of the future. You don't have to. If you use the future, it is grammatically correct in Italian. But in spoken language, we tend to use the present tense. 1. When we are talking about actions or events that will happen for sure. 2. With the periodo ipotetico della realtà, which means to express hypotheses for situations which are real or possible. 3. With dovere, to have to, followed by the infinitive when expressing a future action. Then we have 4 cases when you must use the future tense. Here you cannot use the present tense. And those are 1. When we make an hypothesis and we just are not completely sure. 2. when we express disbelief, doubt, uncertainty. 3. With actions that have a long duration in the future, especially with adverbs such as sempre, always, and mai, never. 4. With the expressions ti dirò, I'll tell you, sarà, it will be, and pensare che plus a verb in the future. To think that plus a verb in the future. Perfetto, quindi abbiamo visto dei casi specifici quando si può usare il presente al posto del futuro e quando si deve utilizzare il futuro. Questo è tutto per questo episodio di Italian Grammar Made Easy. Grazie di essere stata qui con me. Remember to download the free guide at italianmatters.com/6 and also take the quiz. The quiz is auto-graded and it really tests you on what we talked about today. Ci vediamo giovedì prossimo, ancora qui, con un altro episodio. Grazie e buon giovedì, buon fine settimana. Ciao!